Hey everybody, it's your boy Fang. Welcome back to the next Elder Scrolls Cooking Experience video. Today, our topic is going to be the Roadside Inns of Cyrodiil. Unlike Skyrim, which only has a few roadside inns, the roads of Cyrodiil are dotted with them. This is very handy, because to level up in Oblivion you have to sleep, and to sleep you need a bed. Another great thing they have is food and drink for the wary traveler. Now let's talk about what we'd expect to see in terms of food at these places. I imagine they would be fairly standard pub fare, with simplicity and taste taking a front seat, and anything complicated or requiring exotic ingredients would be much less likely to be found on the menu. With these things in mind, I have created a meal that is relatively simple, requires relatively few ingredients, and of those ingredients, all of them are found relatively close together in one area of Cyrodiil. Welcome back again to my humble text file. Here we have the menu for this evening, 3 courses same as last time. We're doing shepherd's pie, and the reason we're doing shepherd's pie is because it's actually an ingredient in Cyrodiil. It's one of the relatively few finished foods that you can find in the Imperial Province, so we're going to have a look at making one. We're going to be using beef, as obviously you should. Now the beef that we're going to be picking up, as you will see, is going to be a solid cut. Thankfully, the difference between ground beef and solid beef is a few minutes with the right tool. We're also going to be picking up some potatoes, because we need the mashed potato topping. Now for the filler, other than the roast beef, we're going to be using onion, carrot, and corn. We're going to season it with fennel seeds, fire salts, and garlic. You know where we got the fire salts, I won't make you sit through that again. The fennel seeds, these are again left over from the last cooking, as is the garlic. So now that I've talked about the shepherd's pie, let's go on to the potato bread. So for the potato bread, we're going to be needing potatoes, obviously, flour, which is also in the game, fire salts, because you need salt in the bread, and the hush-hush ingredients that you can't find in Cyrodiil but are necessary for making bread are eggs and yeast. Now you might argue that egg isn't really technically necessary, and alright, fair enough, but yeast absolutely is. Because when we're looking at the breads in Cyrodiil, these are leavened breads, they're not unleavened like pita, so we know that they have to be using yeast, and that's why I'm getting away with using yeast even though technically it's not an ingredient in the game. Now very similar to the potato bread, we're going to be making Lotus Treats. What's a Lotus Treat, you might ask? It's an adaptation of a traditional Chinese sweet food that I was unaware of until fairly recently. Thank you again, Lady Fang. Now there's going to be potato in it because the base flour, the flour bread mixture, the dough, there we are, that's the word for it, is going to be the same for both the potato bread and the Lotus Treats, just for simplicity's sake. So we have the potato that's already going to be in there, along with the flours and the salt, but we're going to be adding lotus paste and honey to it. The honey is going to be glazed on top of it, applied with a brush, and the lotus paste is going to be stuffed in there with the dough wrapped around it and then baked. You're going to have a look and see what this looks like later, and obviously we're going to be using egg and yeast because it's the same dough. Now let's start collecting ingredients for our shepherd's pie. First off, we're headed to the estate of Lord Drad, a notable slave owner on the Gold Coast. We're here to pick some of his corn, which is over here, and beyond that we're going to pick up some potatoes from him. But we're not quite done with Lord Drad. We are going to wait until it is night, sneak into his house, and rob him of his beef. Now I don't feel too bad about this, given that he is a literal slave owner, and Malakath will be visiting him very soon, or rather his champion will. And next up we're headed to the Brina Cross Inn. Again, this is on the Gold Coast, it's just southeast I believe of Lord Drad's estate, all locally sourced. Unfortunately, again, we are going to be engaged in some theft, but hey, you want to stay local, sometimes you gotta steal. We've got onions there, which we're going to pick up, and up the stairs on the right we have some carrots. Grab one of those, and it turns out that there's some garlic there, so we might as well get some fresh garlic, not that old nasty stuff from the Goblin video. Anyway, we're out of here and on to our next objectives. And now that we've got all the ingredients we need for our Gold Coast shepherd's pie, we can start talking about the potato bread. Now avid players of Oblivion will know that there's already an NPC at the Fairgyle Inn who sells potato bread. That would be Sierra. She also has a quest associated with her, in which you go and rescue her jumbo potatoes from an ogre who has stolen them. After fighting the ogre and looting the potatoes from its body, you can return to Sierra and earn your just reward, which is, of course, potato bread. Now, you can actually go back to her later in the game and buy more potato bread, so don't hesitate to eat it. Looks the same as normal bread in the inventory, but it is worth 30 gold and gives you detect life. Now let's talk about our own potato bread. We're gonna need some flour. And where do you go to get flour in Cyrodiil? You go, of course, to Salmo the baker. Now, he does not in fact sell anything, although his treats are found in shops throughout Cyrodiil. He does have a basement full of flour, though. Unfortunately, standing right there, we have to do some Oblivion hijinks to pick the lock over his shoulder, but once we're down there, we're going to grab some flour. Staying in Skingrad, we're going to head over to the Two Sisters Lodge, which we made use of in the last video, in order to buy some mead. Now, there's no honey in Cyrodiil, but because there is mead, we know they have access to honey. And having picked up that mead to fulfill the honey requirement, we can go off searching for an ingredient we need for the Lotus Treats. And that ingredient is Lotus Seeds. We can find it southeast of Skingrad in large amounts around this pond. Now, what do we need the seeds for? Well, we need it for the lotus paste, of course. It's going inside the Lotus Treats. And once we pick that up, we have assembled all the ingredients we need for this meal. Or have we? Because I forgot that I needed a drink for this whole meal, and that drink is going to be a nice summer lager. So I've gone to the Two Sisters again to pick up some beer. They're getting a lot of my money lately. And with those ingredients in tow, we're off to an inn to start assembling it. We've got our Gold Coast Shepherd's Pie, and our West Weald Lotus Treats and potato bread. Let's see how it turned out in real life. Here are all the ingredients before the cooking process. Let's start on the far right with the ground up beef. We've got the flour in a white bowl above that, and to the left of that we've got purple, blue, and green containers containing lotus paste, yeast, and honey respectively. Above that we've got our summer lager. To the left we have the 2 eggs to act as a binding agent in the bread. Below that we've got corn, our fire salts, and our fennel seeds. On the cutting board itself we've got our carrots and potatoes, our garlic, our onions, and also some mushrooms left over from the last video. These are the same kind as we used in the stew. Obviously the potatoes are pretty important to this whole process, so I've skinned a whole bunch of them. They're used in the bread, obviously they have to be mixed in the flour, and they're the coating on top of the shepherd's pie. Now, my extremely simple method for cutting up these potatoes is just to halve them and then quarter them. Then, throw them in that pot of boiling water on the left, mash them up when they're done. Next up comes the onions. Relatively small chunks. I'm just slicing them, then I'm going to cut across, put them into little chunks that I'm going to fry up in a pan. Going into the pan at the same time is going to be some garlic, some mushrooms, and some carrots. But before any of that goes into the pan, we got to make sure that the roast beef is cooked thoroughly. You can see here I've put some fennel seeds on it and I'm salting it as well. And now we're going to put the rest of the vegetables into this pan. Now if you're beginning to think that this looks a little bit off, don't worry, I came to that conclusion later. Still, this decision would come back to bite me, and it would be the first in a series of decisions that had this effect on the meal. So... run when you can! Anyway, the mashed potatoes were done. Nice, fluffy mashed potatoes. And we could go on to the dough. I was assisted in this by the able hands of Lady Fang, who is somewhat of an accomplished baker, at least in our house anyway. You can see that the honey, some mashed potatoes, and the butter are already in there, soon to be joined by salt and the yeast, which is being activated right now in a cup. You can also see that I transferred the shepherd pie ingredients into a larger pot and added some water to get them to cook faster. This ended up being somewhat of a problem because I didn't end up needing to do that because the cooking took place over 2 days instead of the 1 that I had originally intended. The shepherd's pie turned out reasonably well though. You can see that the ingredients are in their cooking container with the reduced gravy mixture on top, and soon the shepherd's pie is complete with the mashed potatoes and a bit of paprika on top. Paprika, not an ingredient? Well, sue me. Anyway, the next morning we woke up and took out the dough that we had in the fridge. Now the dough actually looks pretty reasonable here, but this was only achieved after many hours of kneading, adding flour, leaving it, and repeating the process again and again until we got it right. The dough was by nature extremely sticky. Why was the dough by nature extremely sticky? Because I messed up the recipe. We used regular water instead of potato water because I poured the potato water out into the sink. Well, that's pretty dumb, Fang. Why did you do that? I was extremely mind-flooded trying to get this done in 1 day. And when we switched to a 2-day build, well, a lot of my decisions really seem silly in retrospect. Another thing is that we didn't exactly follow the potato bread recipe to the letter, because it was extremely sticky, so we kept adding more flour. What ended up being the potato bread looked pretty good, but this was mostly due to luck and the assistance of Lady Fang more than anything else. And now we can pass on to the Lotus Treats using the same dough as the potato bread. Once the dough was sorted, these came along quite nicely. Just a ball of lotus paste in the middle of a bunch of dough, with honey glazed over the top, stuck in a pan, and then fired into the oven. And here's the finished product. As you can see, the meal is complete. We've got the beer over in that cup. These are the Lotus Treats with the lotus paste in the center. You can see we have the potato bread here, which actually turned out pretty good, both in taste and in texture. Behind that, we've got the shepherd's pie. Ultimately, it was done by the end of the first day, and all I had to do was fire it in the oven to heat it up. That's pretty normal for shepherd's pie. Anyway, to wrap up this episode of Oblivion Cooking with Fang, I want to make mention that this episode is meant to be a relatively simple and short episode that will slot between Goblin Chef and what's to come up next, which is going to be the Inns of Cyrodiil, except not the Roadside Inns, but the Inns of the Cities. So you can look forward to a fairly ambitious cooking attempt to do justice to the cosmopolitan cooking culture of the cities of Cyrodiil. I hope you will join me then, and until then, I will catch you next time.